Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 16, Episode 168. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Monday, Steelers Nation. Dave, it is the final countdown. The players will have reported to training camp this time 24 hours from now, with practice just on the horizon on Wednesday. So really the last day of the 2026 off-season for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and everything that counts and matters of the Mike McCarthy era is on the other side. So, Dave, how you doing?
All right, happy Monday. Hope you enjoyed your weekend there. Watched the Cubs series, Cubs-Pirates series, and very disappointed there. At least they were able to salvage a game at the end. Boy, they really need to get hot here in these two series. It'd be nice to see them. I think they got the Arizona Diamondbacks these next 3 days. They certainly need to sweep that to give us any reason to kind of watch moving forward, I think, with them. But obviously, training camp coming, report day coming on Tuesday, first practice on Wednesday. We will start off these special edition episodes of the Terrible Podcast, I believe, after the first practice on Wednesday there. I think you and I at the top of the show are going to talk about, I think, what we think at least report day will look like, how maybe the days will start shaping up. Obviously, Mike McCarthy, new head coach, got a little bit of a different schedule moving forward. That's also going to make it, I think, super tough on days Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when we have our regular podcast episodes. So we'll have to kind of play that by ear. But any day that obviously you go out to Latrobe and there's a training camp practice, there will be a special edition of the podcast that evening, as has been the case for several years now and all. But I've got my 53-man roster prediction up on the site ahead of training camp this morning. I think we'll talk about that. I think we got a little bit other news. All the draft picks are now under contract right now, just like we thought would be the case, although it took a little bit longer. So I guess we can kind of open up the show with that news.
Sure. Everyone is signed, sealed, and delivered for the Steelers in the NFL at large. All 257 draft picks this April are under contract, including one Drew Allar, who signed his deal a couple days ago, and the dominoes began to fall in the way that we thought that they would. Carson Beck signs, Fernando Mendoza signs, and then 24 hours later, Drew Allar signs his 4-year rookie contract. Don't know exact details on any language for Beck, or certainly not on Allar yet, but all that matters is he is signed and ready to go for training camp.
Yeah, we don't know the specifics on it yet. I know at the very least that Over the Cap has entered him into the database. Now we'll have to find out more about this, just to dot the T's and cross the I's, or vice versa. It looks like only the signing bonus is guaranteed on him, and I thought that might be the case. Now, people will say, well, if that ended up being the case, he ended up being slotted, exactly where we thought where it would be. Specifically with the guy that the players that signed, that were drafted right before him and right after him, then what the heck was the holdup? Well, we might never know the actual answer to that question, but I would imagine it might be related to injury guarantees and offset language, and maybe split salary language, as far as if he was to have to go to IR or not. Because generally, I think when you get around those third-round draft picks, I'll have to look back at records. I don't remember whether or not rookie seasons with third round draft picks are generally full pay or split pay if they wind up going on IR. But we'll get all that sorted out here in the next couple of days as soon as that contract officially hits the NFLPA side of the database there. But the pertinent news here is he signed, sealed, and delivered now, and he will be should be a full go at the start of training camp here, and that it was a little bit of a surprise that it took so long to get him done, but he is done.
Right, and that's all that matters, and it really was just a matter, at least in my view, and I think it's pretty obvious and pretty clear to guess that just waiting for the Carson Beck deal to get done. The Mendoza deal really didn't impact things because that's first overall, just a different world, but Beck, dozen or so spots ahead of Aller. His agent just wanted to see where that deal for Beck came in at to make sure that Aller didn't get a deal where he was missing out on something that Beck got to try to angle for. And assuming Beck got nothing crazy special in his deal, that really kind of put Aller's camp in a bind just to take whatever probably a standard deal for that 76th overall pick is, quarterback aside. Because the quarterback always complicates things, just given the specialty and the value of the position. But all that matters is the deal is done. He'll be out there at training camp Wednesday, and Pittsburgh is good to go. So let's talk about report day. The players will be arriving. I think some may even arrive Monday night. We know that they're in the area. I think you had posted. Give me the backstory because I wasn't super familiar. I was off this weekend, but Aaron Rodgers, Ben Skoranek getting some ice cream?
that was from last year at Latrobe.
Oh, that was last year at Latrobe.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that was this year at Latrobe. I wasn't sure on the context of that, but I'm sure they're going to make those stops at the Meadows, which is just a 20-minute drive, if that, from training camp this year. So, report day, the players should be reporting either tonight or by tomorrow morning. They'll have conditioning tests. Mike McCarthy is going to speak to the media. Players, I think select players at least, will be speaking to the media. We don't know if exactly it's going to be the same format. In fact, we know it's not going to be the exact same format because in the Mike Tomlin era, players would sort of filter in throughout the day, throughout late morning, early afternoon, sort of just coming on their own volition. Now it seems like it's a little more segmented or kind of regimented, where you're going to have guys come in early and kind of hit this thing pretty early in the day. So we should get to hear from players pretty early on Tuesday. I assume the same will be for Mike McCarthy, and so we'll be watching for what they have to say as they report to training camp.
Yeah, it'll be a little bit different. Interesting to follow how many scrums will there be out there, I guess, on Tuesday morning. It kind of feels like it won't be as many, and I'm guessing just the select are going to be over at what they call it, the Fred Rogers what do they call that media room?
The Fred Rogers Institute. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds like the plan there, and I think moving forward into training camp as well too. McCarthy's going to be speaking before practice and not after. I think the position coaches, how many days a week will they be, or at least the coordinators be available? I think at least maybe one day a week, something like that. But anyway, we're just going to have to kind of get a feel for how this thing will go, and it does. I don't know what your main takeaway here is, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be the same volume of player access, at least when it comes to reporting day, right?
That seems to be the sense, but we won't know until we know. And I don't know how the team will handle things with their own produced content for the website and the YouTube channel and versus what reporters were able to get. It did feel like during the spring, which is all we can go off right now, where there was a little less access, fewer interviews overall, but we shall see. It's a new experience, and that's part of a coaching change. Is each coach has their own way of doing things, and McCarthy certainly has his own kind of hallmarks and staples different than Mike Tomlin. And so that's the fun of a new head coach, is everything is different.
And if Mike McCarthy speaks, in the morning, then you kind of wonder if we'll know the full PUP or NFI list until potentially later on in the day, specifically if they have the conditioning test later in the day. Maybe he'll give during this press conference some sort of inclination of what's going to happen with Broderick Jones. That's obviously a key name that we're watching at the start of training camp here. But we might be waiting until right around 4 o'clock Eastern time to find out maybe what the full PUP or NFL NFI list is as far as that goes. So I don't know really what to expect here. I know what's kind of being reported out there by a few members of the media, but I think until they really go through it for the first time, they might be grasping a little bit at just speculation here. So it will be different. And then obviously the first practice will get underway on Wednesday or on Wednesday. Yeah.
And that looks like a shorter practice. We have the schedule. They have it listed. What is it? 11:20 start time to 12:46 per the schedule. Other practices later in camp that'll start 11:20 will end up 1 o'clock or later. So that's typical in this ramp up period. Even under Mike Tomlin, that first practice usually a bit shorter, very much OTA spring like type of work. Pads cannot come on until early in August. So to sort of continue the grasping at speculation, as you said, we'll find out about the injured list guys hopefully by tomorrow evening at the latest. Broderick Jones, the top name to watch. Will he start on active PUP? Will he avoid it? If he does avoid it, what will be his level of participation for a Wednesday practice? Other names who could be candidates, we mentioned him a little bit, I think, on the last show. Dante Kent, the corner, coming off his December torn ACL. I know that Jamel Dean, according to Mark Cabaldi, was pretty limited in the spring. I think with his hip injury he battled last year. Sebastian Joseph Day, Ray Fittipaldo had mentioned that he got nicked up late in spring work. And so those could be some names to watch for. If Jones aside, you get, Dean or Joseph Day on active PUP, let's say, those are typically short stays. I wouldn't be super alarmed by that. You see a lot of teams around the league putting guys on active PUP. George Kittle on active PUP does not mean they're going to miss the first 4 games of the season. It's just some flexibility teams like to have. It's not even clear a roster spot if guys are on active PUP. So just some names to watch for. And of course, there could always be surprises.
All right, and there's always it's hard to predict what an NFI non-football injury list might look like. We've had a few surprises over the years when it comes to that. I think the most interesting thing, and rolling back to the Broderick Jones thing again, is if he does indeed stay open on active PUP. Obviously, if he practices any time before the start of the regular season, and that obviously includes playing in any preseason games. He is, once a player comes off of active PUP list, they are no longer eligible to go back on it once again. So if anything were to happen with any players who either don't start training camp on active PUP or do start on active PUP and then are able to practice at some point between now and week 1, if they were to get injured or not right for whatever reason, if you're wanting to retain them, they would have to and not be on the 53-man roster. They obviously would have to be on IR. In a case of a player that starts training camp on active PUP and remains on that list for the entire rest of the offseason, then the decision would need to be made to move them to reserve PUP or activate them to a 53-man roster or waiver cut them at that point. And in Broderick Jones' case, if he were to start the regular season on reserve PUP, all eyes would then be on how long is he going to stay on there. And if he does stay on that list all season, then his because it's the final year of his current contract, that contract would toll, and then he would not become an unrestricted free agent next offseason. But we got plenty of time to worry about that. The biggest question is what will the initial active PUP / NFI list look here in about, I don't know, probably a little more than 24 hours from now. So I think you and I are planning on having a podcast that will record late Tuesday night, and then that will go up at midnight, I think, Wednesday morning, and serve as our Wednesday regular edition of the podcast, because obviously you'll be making the trek out to Latrobe for the start of training camp.
And for those unfamiliar with the term in case a player does show up on it and it's impossible to predict. Can you just explain what NFI is and if it functions any differently than, say, active PUP?
It's called a non-football injury list, and it's just a list that's different than PUP. Uh, they would still count against the active 91 man roster or 91 man offseason roster for the Steelers. They just it gives the team the ability to move that player. In other words, that player could still start the regular season on the NFI, on what would be called the reserve NFI list if they're not able to practice. I think I think they differentiate those two because of how they could potentially impact their pay if the injury, because it's called a non-football injury list. In other words, maybe they were training on their own, or remember Minka Fitzpatrick fell off the bike or whatnot. I think it's more of just of a different classification should that end up should they wind up missing time at the start of the regular season. Obviously, some players have injury guarantees, and younger players don't. They would still have potentially a split salary that comes into that. So it's just another classification that just say, hey, this guy is dealing with an injury that did not happen on the football field, whereas a physically unable to perform list as a player that is still dealing with an injury that happened on the football field.
Yeah, well said. And that's one very minor detail on the service, but the non-football injury list can be, as you said, you can be training and doing something football related, but if it's not at a team facility, if it's on your own, that usually gets qualified for NFI because it didn't happen under sort of team supervision or in the team facility or team grounds. And so you can get also the oddball things like a Minka Fitzpatrick falling off his bike on vacation and hurting his hand or whatever it was, but it also can be just normal football activity, but not on team location where the team can put him on NFI, and as you said, it impacts pay. But again, usually guys who get placed on there, and majority of cases are short stays. Even back to PUP is often the same thing. It's different with Broderick Jones, obviously, but the others, I wouldn't be super alarmed unless other reporting comes out that suggests a lengthier stay.
Right, exactly.
All right, Dave. So yeah, report day should be pretty interesting, but excited for that. Let's also just briefly talk about some news over the weekend as it relates to the cornerback market. We know that a couple of top corners angling to get paid, including one, Joey Porter Jr., but it's not just him. There's Christian Gonzalez of the Patriots. There is Devon Witherspoon of the Seahawks. And while those two sides negotiate with the player and team in Seattle and New England, Robert Kraft, the Patriots owner, made some waves this weekend when he told reporters publicly on the record out there in the open that the Patriots made Christian Gonzalez an offer to make him the highest paid corner in the NFL that would top the $31 million per year Trent McDuffie received from the LA Rams as part of his trade from the Chiefs earlier this offseason. Now, the details beyond $31 million we don't know about, but we know that it would seem likely whenever Gonzalez gets paid, he's going to top McDuffie on that top number, and Witherspoon would probably then try to jump Gonzalez if Gonzalez gets paid first. And so we kind of see the market start to really take off from there. And how that impacts Joey Porter Jr., Dave, we'll have to see. But what are your thoughts on this market that seems to be heating up?
Yeah, I mean, it all sounds good, at least for Christian Gonzalez at this point in time. But the fact still remains he is still not signed that deal. Now, will that happen within the first week of training camp? I guess we'll see here. And then, as you mentioned, how quickly, if indeed something happens, would Witherspoon follow? And then, if Joey Porter Jr. wants to be a top three paid highest corner, in the NFL, where would that slot him? You would think that he would not, he wouldn't top Gonzalez or Witherspoon. I use that phrase carefully, but you could still see him come in. I guess over the, let's say, 30.1 million, specifically if, or actually, I guess would have to come in above 31 million if he's going to be a top three. If indeed Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez beat him to the altar per se, and both become, let's say, the top two highest paid cornerbacks in the NFL. And then we can get back into the conversation that, if Joey Porter's new deal does not end up, whatever the whatever the hierarchy is at the time he signs the deal. We'll see whether or not, obviously, if Gonzalez or Witherspoon are part of that hierarchy. But the guaranteed money aspect, at least the fully guaranteed money past the first year, and first year meaning obviously still 2026, because if he's not a top three, it would kind of set a new precedent, if you will, if, let's say, Joey Porter Jr. came in number 4 officially on the list of highest paid corners, and then got fully guaranteed money beyond 2026. That would kind of set a new precedent. Now we roll back, to the DK Metcalf deal, and I think at the time of his signing, he was like number 2 or number 3 on the wide receiver list. So at least you had that precedent to go on. So time, if the Steelers were smart here, I mean, there's two ways to look at this. If the Steelers were smart, they would get this done before either Gonzalez or Witherspoon gets done. And on the flip side, maybe Joey Porter Jr. would be smart to wait to see how much longer it might take for Christian Gonzalez or Witherspoon to get their deal done. So you could make arguments really for both sides here. The Steelers to obviously try to be in a hurry here, and Joey Porter Jr. side to potentially maybe want to drag their feet, especially if they you would have to think that there's been enough conversation to know where the Steelers' heads are, at least generally, when it comes to this. So it's a cat and mouse game that we'll see if it will get solved by the first practice, which is obviously on Wednesday. And if it doesn't, when it comes to Joey Porter Jr., you would expect him to start, a traditional training camp hold in, if you will, where he only kind of goes through individual drill stuff and sits out the team portion until something gets settled there. And then if indeed that happens, how long will this linger? And you and I had the conversation a couple of weeks ago that, okay, personally, I'm not that concerned, first handful of practices, if he's not involved in the team stuff. But if we're talking 10, 12 practices into training camp, specifically maybe by the time we get closer to the first preseason game, and he's still not taking part in team practices, you become a bit concerned, because you got some new pieces, obviously, in the secondary, new defensive coordinator, some new schematics and things related to that. So in addition to Broderick Jones being something that obviously we'll have close eyes on when it comes to the start of training camp, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Joey Porter Jr. thing on a quite regular basis, I think, as well, too, especially if he does not get a deal done by the first practice on Wednesday.
And while deals can happen in a moment, and Pittsburgh often works quietly behind the scenes, and Omar Khan has certainly shown a level of swiftness in getting deals done, especially this offseason. It feels like Witherspoon with Seattle and Gonzalez with New England have had more productive and substantial talks, from the reporting that Witherspoon and Seattle were really working pretty hard to try and get a deal done soon. And we heard Kraft talk about a formal offer that would have made Gonzalez highest paid corner in the league, although their negotiations continue. Not heard the same on Porter. In fact, we've heard negotiations really had been pretty light, if they were happening at all, during the summer break. Now, that could certainly pick up, and probably would pick up at the start of training camp, but if you were a betting man, you'd probably sit there and say Gonzalez and Witherspoon get paid before Joey Porter Jr. gets paid. But we shall see. And as you said, if no deal is done by Wednesday at 11:20 a.m., which is when practice begins on the first day, you would assume a hold-in for Porter. What does that look like? It could be where he dresses and does individual work. That is possible. But it also could be he just does nothing the entire time. TJ Watt sort of was in between in his 21 hold-in, where he was in uniform and would kind of do a couple of drills, but not really work even in individual. Kim Hayward was starting off last year doing kind of full work, and then by the end of camp, he was doing basically nothing at all, as he sort of had his mini weird hold-in situation there. And so Porter's could kind of run the gamut of what a hold-in looks like, but obviously would not be practicing in full, not practicing during those team periods. And so that's going to be a real big storyline to watch. And as you said, the longer this thing drags on for, with a new coaching staff, a new scheme, new verbiage, new system, new coaches, the more impact it'll have on Porter.
Right, exactly. And I think that, we can we'll see what happens with Keanu Benton as the offseason progresses, but I'm not expecting any kind of hold in on his part here. We'll just have to say I don't think they ultimately get him done, but leave the door open for that potentially happen. I know what Spencer Anderson changed agents recently. We'll have to see if anything happens there. I don't think it will, but I don't want to speak in guarantees either when it comes to that. And we could turn around later tonight and end up get breaking news on Joey Porter Jr. You just never know the timing of these things as well too. But the fact that here we are on the eve of reporting day, and really there's been no news as far as the Porter situation goes. It would come out of left field if he all of a sudden gets a deal signed, let's say tonight or first thing in the morning, or basically any time before Wednesday. So, just one of the talking points that until there is some conclusion, finality to the contract situation, we're obligated to kind of discuss what Porter is doing and not doing at the start of training camp.
The only timeline we can confidently say about Porter is that a deal, should one get done, will have to happen before September 13th, before
Right.
kickoff against Atlanta. Pittsburgh has their self-imposed deadline of getting deals done before the regular season begins. And we've seen deals get done pretty last minute before. TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, even Pat Frymuth's deal a couple years ago was pretty late in the process. And with the regular season starting pretty late this year, September 13th for Pittsburgh, that gives a lot of runway from
Mhm.
now until then for a deal to get hammered out. And so this thing, it could happen quickly. Omar Khan has shown that, but it certainly could take some time as well.
Yeah, and then once again, as you mentioned, the regular season not getting started until right around the middle of September. There, I mean, today's July 27th, so there's still a lot of time for those
Hmm.
two sides to talk and get something done. I think both of us agree something will get done at some point. It's just a matter of when.
Exactly. All right, Dave, let's go to your roster prediction. We did my roster prediction on the Friday show. And so for the final episode of season 16, let's talk about your 53-man group that you predict how it'll look before training camp starts. We'll start here with the quarterbacks, and you're going the same with me and Aaron Rodgers, Will Howard, and Drew Allar. So your thoughts on leaving one Mason Rudolph off the list?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what I've said most of the offseason here, sight unseen with Will Howard. Yeah, I'm going to give the nod to him right now, right out of the chute. Howard obviously will need to give the organization confidence that they can move forward with him as the backup to Aaron Rodgers throughout training camp and throughout preseason. That'll be yet another storyline to watch at the start of training camp. Will Howard be kind of the defined number two at the start of practices? Will there be some mixing and matching maybe between Mason Rudolph and Will Howard as far as second team reps? And then obviously when we get into the start of the preseason games, we expect to see Will Howard a lot throughout the preseason. Probably none of Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, we expect to see a lot of Drew Allar. Then it becomes, how much will Mason Rudolph end up playing? Will he? Will one of those games he start the game as the starting quarterback, assuming Aaron Rodgers doesn't play in any of these games? Will Howard? Yeah, I just really think this is a battle, a loser leave town match, if you will. Overall, I don't believe if whichever one ends up, and this obviously assumes the team does not keep four quarterbacks, which I'll open up. I'll leave open the plausibility of that happen. I just think realistically that won't happen. My viewpoint is the loser of Will Howard, Mason Rudolph, will end up with another organization. In other words, I don't think either will wind back to the practice squad. I think there might be a team out there willing to take on either one of Howard or Mason Rudolph onto their 53-man roster to be either, and maybe in Rudolph's case, the a number two, or in Howard's case, maybe a number three. But for right now, sight unseen with Will Howard specifically, I'm going to give the nod to him. And then, look, I reserve the right as things move forward with my weekly or roster predictions to make the change between Rudolph and Howard there. But I will give the nod to Howard until I have a reason not to moving forward.
Fair, and that's my calculation too. I would expect and think that when training camp opens up on Wednesday, Will Howard will be operating as the number 2 quarterback. It's his job to lose. He certainly could lose it though with a poor performance. Has to show this coaching staff a lot throughout this entire process. Not to poke at it too much because I know the odds are not terribly likely, but just as one additional thought, what would have to happen to give you more consideration to keep all 4 quarterbacks? What would you have to hear or read about or watch in preseason action to sit there and say, you know what, there is a legitimate chance they could keep 4 quarterbacks. I might consider that more strongly for my roster prediction.
I think if you look at maybe potentially what happens with Roman Wilson, and if Roman Wilson just has an ugly training camp in preseason, do you really need to keep 6 wide receivers at that point? Could you get by with Metcalf, Pittman, Jeremy Bernard, Ben Skoranek, and Caden Weegan, especially if you end up keeping Eli Heidenreich as a running back / wide receiver? That would at least open up give you maybe a roster spot to play with if you wanted to keep a 4th quarterback. And then, obviously, I think looking at the offensive linemen, are you going to keep 8 or are you going to keep 9? We'll talk about that more in my prediction moving forward. I think potentially those would be a couple at least position groups where if you went one fewer than where I actually went in this one for myself, that depending on injuries and how other things shake out. Look, I mean, you could go in, the Omar Khan and Mike McCarthy might go in. They probably have at least their initial what they maybe think the 53 might look like on a board somewhere right now. But so many different things can happen in the next 4 or 5 weeks. Obviously, that injuries or what have you, or someone playing their way onto the roster that could really change that right now. But I would think, at least the way my 53-man roster prediction is set up, if they were to keep 4 quarterbacks, it feels like it might come as a byproduct of the team maybe only carrying 5 true wide receivers or maybe just 8 offensive linemen in total.
So do you think the 4 quarterback scenario has less to do about how the quarterbacks perform and just more to do about roster construction elsewhere?
Uh, I
Because
I I view it as roster construction
okay.
elsewhere.
I don't know. My thought was something weird would have to happen at quarterback where Howard's sort of in this in between of there's a couple of good moments and a couple of negative moments and a sort of typical young quarterback roller coaster ride. And so they still want to hang on to him. And yeah, maybe there's an injury elsewhere that opens up the spot. I mean, that can make the math certainly a lot more palatable. But I think it's gonna something will have to happen at quarterback. I don't think it'll be just external non-quarterback factors alone that get them to keep 4 quarterbacks.
Look, if Will Howard has you guessing after training camp in the preseason about whether or not he can be the number 2, then in my opinion, he hasn't given you confidence. And then you could just move on from him is my
Well,
view on it.
I understand that, and I think certainly in a scenario like that, it means Rudolph is the number 2, otherwise, why were you keeping Rudolph? But it'd be something where, like, we don't believe Howard can be the number 2 right away, but we still see something in him that we wanna keep working at, and so we're gonna keep Rudolph as the number 2 for this season at least, and just continue to develop Howard behind the scenes. I mean, that it's a tough thread to or tough needle to thread a needle? I'm getting my phrases mixed up here, but that would probably be the path where, like, Howard is flashing, but not consistent enough, but they don't wanna move on entirely.
All right. Uh, I'll leave open once again the plausibility of it happening. I just don't think it's going to happen that way.
Alright, fair enough. At running back, there's some intrigue here too, Dave. You're keeping 4 in Jalen Warren, Rico Dowdle, Travis Homer, and Eli Heidenreich, so keeping Homer and Heidenreich and leaving off Caleb Johnson.
Yeah, I kind of wrestled with this a little bit, going back to at least to some of the comments that Art Rooney made, but not that Art Rooney decides what the 53-man roster is. But I like Eli Heidenreich. I'm pulling for him there. I think he has a unique skill set wide receiver / running back there. I think the most notable thing here is I have Caleb Johnson not making the 53-man roster. I really want to see if he can do anything during the preseason to help his special teams value. Travis Homer obviously is the better special teams player right now, and he's had at least a cup of coffee in NFL offenses to this point. Could get you out of a game should indeed the situation happened where maybe Warren or Dowdle went down or what have you there. So for right now, and I'm not married to it. I mean, obviously Warren and Dowdle are going to make the roster. I'm giving the edge to Homer over Caleb Johnson, and then Heidenreich just because of his skill set. And even though I do think that if indeed all four of these running backs wind up making the 53-man roster and they're the only four running backs kept, I think there's a good chance you could see Eli Heidenreich as a early season inactive.
So by keeping Heidenreich, is that sort of we don't want to risk losing him? We just like the skill set and believe he's one of the best 53. Is that sort of why he's still sticking around?
Yeah, he's just one of your best 53 overall, and the potential of him liking his skill set. I don't think you make the decisions for the sheer fact that, well, if we waive him, he'll get claimed off of waivers. Either he's going to earn the roster spot or he's not. And I do like his unique skill set. Once again, I think he is a guy that you could potentially project be inactive to start the season. But I just think he finds a way to find himself onto the roster just by his practice and his play in preseason.
Okay, fair enough. And not to jump ahead, but you have Riley Nowakowski with the tight end. So for those wondering, where is Nowakowski? He is on the team, just on a different position group. Let's go to receivers first, though, before tight ends, Dave. And I think you're pretty chalk here, like I would assume a lot of people, and myself included: DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman Jr., Roman Wilson, Jeremy Bernard, Ben Skoranek, and Caden Weegan. So keeping 6 in total.
Yeah, this is fairly cut and dry with the main question mark. It feels like being Roman Wilson. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt right now that he'll make this roster. Bernard and Weegan, the 2 draft picks, you expect to make the roster. Weegan more specifically as your return man, and then Ben Skoranek really doesn't give you that much on offense. He can function in case of emergency, if need be, but his special teams work, I think, speaks for itself. So essentially, this is four wide receivers and 2 special teamers, if you will, overall there. So for the time being, I have Roman Wilson making the roster, and even though this is technically 6, it feels more like 4, and then that's not yet another reason potentially Eli Heidenreich can make the roster because I think he's a fairly accomplished wide receiver coming out of Navy.
Kind of hit me with a 3 men and a baby reference there with 4 receivers and 2 special teamers. I'm going to take a page out of the Rich Eisen playbook, Dave, and ask you, what's more likely, Pittsburgh keeping only 5 wide receivers or them keeping 7 wide receivers if someone else makes this team?
Oh, I would say 5. If you maybe choose between 5 and 7, I just don't know who else would be specifically that you would dress, because you would expect Skoranek and Weegan to dress. You would expect Metcalf, Pittman, and Jeremy Bernard to dress as well too. So if you ended up with 7, you're not going to dress all 7 of those guys.
But somebody just might play really well and just we got to keep this guy. I mean, that's reasonable.
It would have to be a hell of a damn showing,
Yeah, I agree.
But I think the number ends up being 6, specifically if you don't count Eli Heidenreich as a wide receiver and you're counting him in a running back room. But if the number's not 6, I would lean towards it being 5 instead of 7.
Gotcha. Tight ends and fullbacks, you're keeping 3 with Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, and there lies Riley Nowakowski. So your calculation here, Do you think Nowakowski can function as a true tight end? He's going to play more fullback, and then of course leaving Robert Tonyan off the roster.
I don't want to get in a situation where this team's having to use Riley Nowakowski as a true end of the line tight end, but I think he could function there and at least get you through it should injuries happen. How much 11 personnel versus 12 or 13 personnel, I think will factor into this. I think Riley Nowakowski obviously can help you on special teams. So for even if he ends up only playing, let's say, 4 or 5 offensive snaps per game as a H back or fullback or maybe an occasional third tight end. I think that's fine. I think the biggest thing to kind of struggle with here was whether or not put Robert Tonyan on this 53-man roster. I just don't find enough value in both his blocking and his special teams work. Specifically when I'm looking at carving out, say, the 52nd, 53rd spot on this roster, I didn't deem it necessary. I think Robert Tonyan, when the dust clears, is a guy that you could potentially get to the practice squad as one of the veteran players. There's and obviously if you got in a situation, could be elevated throughout the season for whatever reason, injury or whatnot there. So this to me more came down to Robert Tonyan. If I was going to keep a fourth one in this group, would have been the guy, but does he wind up being worthy enough for the spot? Once again, I don't view his blocking and his special teams play as being outstanding enough, especially at this stage of his career, to think that I needed to have him as, say, the 52nd or 53rd spot on the roster.
I understand that. I just wonder, you get into a game and God forbid you lose Freiermuth or Washington. I think you start really getting limited personnel grouping wise. I know Nowakowski has been working as a tight end to some degree. We'll of course get eyes on that in training camp to see how much, but as an inline guy, undersized, bigger than Connor Hayward, but still not really big for a tight end relative to the position. I just wonder about the risk of getting too thin in your
Sure.
personnel.
Sure, but you obviously could use, we'll see how the guard situation stacks out. You could use Spencer Anderson on the end of the line of scrimmage, potentially one of these other tackles or whatnot that they ends up not starting. Maybe if Maxi Yanachor doesn't win a spot, maybe you could cut his teeth as an extra tight end should you run into situations like that. So there's ways around that. I understand the pushback in that. I think Robert Tonyan is going to be an interesting guy to watch throughout training camp. And look, I'll leave myself open to adding Tonyan to this as we move along here. But you have to start somewhere.
Sure.
And I started with Robert Tonyan being off the 53.
And you have him on the practice squad in your 17-man practice squad, and there's always elevations and there's always some maneuvers and levers to push and pull there if you want to get him a hat and a helmet. Let's finish out the offense with the offensive line. You're keeping 9 here. I kept 8. You're going 9 with Frazier, McCormick, Fautanu, Anderson, Ihanachor, Cook, Hoffman, Jennings Dunker, and Jack Driscoll being that 9th offensive lineman.
Yeah, even though I think I'm the one that originally brought up the idea of this team maybe keeping just 8 based on what Mike McCarthy has done, most recently a couple of times when he was with the Cowboys. I personally couldn't pull the trigger on it myself. Now, I will say that I do not have Broderick Jones in this group of 9 because for the time being, I'm going to predict that he starts off on active PUP at the start of training camp. If obviously that does not happen, he would he would go on the list and then Jack Driscoll come off. The interesting thing with Jack Driscoll is I think he gives you a player, obviously, that's got some NFL experience, could play tackle or guard. Obviously, don't think he would be in competition for a starting role. He could potentially, even if the Steelers keep 9 offensive linemen in total, he would be looking potentially as maybe being the odd man out on a game day inactive list moving forward here. So mine are Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, Troy Fautanu, Spencer Anderson, Maxi Yanachor, Dylan Cook, Brock Hoffman, Jennings Dunker, and Jack Driscoll. Obviously, my backup center, at least out of the chute, would be Brock Hoffman. So for those concerned, well, why are you leaving Ryan McCollum off? I just think Ryan McCollum just doesn't even I don't even have Ryan McCollum making my practice squad overall there. So I think Brock Hoffman was brought in to play guard and center and potentially be the backup center to Zach Frazier should something happen there. I think the biggest wild card here when it comes to this group is, will it be 9? Will it be 8? And if it is 9, is it either Jack Driscoll? Is it Broderick Jones? Or maybe it's, if it's not Broderick Jones and he's on active PUP, can one of these other young offensive linemen jump up and grab a spot, overall? But I think there won't be a lot of pushback on at least 8 of these guys. Once again, the question comes down to what happens with Broderick Jones and if indeed they wind up keeping 9.
I know this is a 53-man roster, not a starting lineup, but it sounds like in your mind, Spencer Anderson starting at right guard if Hoffman's going to be the backup center.
Yeah, if I had to draw it out right now, at the start of camp, it would obviously be left to right. It'd be Fautano, Mason McCormick, Zach Frazier, Spencer Anderson, and then Dylan Cook.
Okay. Over Honachur, which
Yeah.
I think is kind of my feeling after talking to some of those Packers and Cowboys guys about how McCarthy approaches some of these rookies. And then just the last question on the offense, like quarterback, to keep 8 offensive linemen, is that just more of a roster construction where you need to find a spot for somebody else, or what could kind of convince you to go down to 8?
Look, if your top 8 guys are all healthy and you got some good position flexibility and Honachur has a good spring and well, obviously, what's going to happen with Broderick Jones if Broderick is on active PUP? Do you necessarily have to keep 9? Maybe not, especially once again if all 8 are healthy, because you're going to have to dress all 8 of those. You're going to have to dress at least 8 on game day as well too. So I think injuries, I think the progression of Ionichor, I think the status of Broderick Jones, and then obviously the rest of the roster. Are you having to carve out another space because of injury or someone playing well, along those lines? So I think it's just multifaceted when it comes to 9 or 8.
So you have 25 on offense, which means you have 25 on defense, and that includes 7 defensive linemen. So Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton, Derek Harmon, Sebastian Joseph Day, Y.A. Black. Those are the easy 5. Your last 2 are Asazio Tomewa and the rookie Gabriel Rubio. So explain why Otomewa and Rubio get the hat over the others.
Yeah, I'm giving the nod to Rubio just for the sheer fact that he's a member of the draft class, and at least most recently under Omar Khan, yeah, it feels like this team goes out of their way to accommodate the draft picks. Now, obviously, we saw last year with Kent, having to go to IR before the season. Those things can obviously happen. Look, I am not married to the last 2 on this list, being Otomewo or Gabriel Rubio. I am married to the first 5, obviously, in Hayward, Benton, Harmon, Sebastian Joseph Day, and Y.A. Black. This thing could go a lot of different directions. I think Otomewo shouldn't. I hope he's potentially renting right now. And then obviously Gabriel Rubio's got to stay healthy and show he can play the run well. Maybe show us a little something as far as pass rush goes, even though I'm holding my breath on that. But I'm just giving the nod to more of a veteran player in Otomewo for one of the spots, and a nod to the to a draft pick classification in Rubio. Both those, once again, those final 2 could go. Both those guys could end up not making it. Both those guys could make it. One of them could end up making it, and the other not. We'll just have to see how it plays out. But that's at least where my head is at. And look, will they keep 7? Will they keep 6? Will they keep 8? 8 feels really, really rich at the position. 6, if you ask me the same question when it came to like the wide receiver group, if they don't keep 6, will they keep 5 or will they keep 7? I guess if you're asking me about defensive linemen, if they don't keep 7, will they keep 6 or will they keep 8? I would lean towards the lower number of keeping 6. But
Same.
Yeah, Otomewo and Rubio, I don't think either one of those guys are stone cold lead pipe blocks as we sit here. But I got to start somewhere, and I'm starting with those 2 guys on.
It's going to be a fun battle for sure between those guys and the rest of the group, Jabity and Lee and Lowry and all the others in there. At inside linebacker, going with just 4 in Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, Cole Holcomb, and Carson Bruner. So insert joke about Malik Harrison here, as he is off the roster. I know you made that point and kind of been 10 toes down on that throughout the offseason. So take it away, Dave.
Yeah, look, I mean, we'll see how injuries and health of this unit stands up. Carson Bruner really liked the special teams ability with him. He'll be hard to keep off the roster as a core special teamer. Feels like Holcomb might be ahead of Malik Harrison, according to some beat writer reports right now. Holcomb also can give you something on special teams. In addition, Malik Harrison, as I've talked most of the offseason here, it feels like specifically with the salary. It feels like square peg, round hole. Not saying that he won't make it, but I've got to be consistent with my thoughts on Malik Harrison for most of the offseason. And if he doesn't take a pay cut, if there aren't injuries in that room, I can see him being the odd man out. And even if this team, look, I think you got to leave open the possibility of 5 being in this group overall. Even if you told me right now that there's going to be 5 inside linebackers on this 53-man roster, and you guaranteed me that, I still would not put Malik Harrison as
Man,
one of the
really?
5. Yeah,
Who would you put in there? Would it be Windman, somebody
I think
else?
potentially a Windman, or I don't know, a Jamin Davis, or something along those lines. I can't justify salary versus what he gives you on defense and special teams right now. Even if you told me once again there's going to be 5 5 inside linebackers, Malik would not make the cut right now. Now look, this will be fluid throughout this thing. You know, one injury at this position could really obviously shake this up a lot, or maybe Malik Harrison decides to take his salary down to half or something like that. That potentially could sway me a little bit. But as things sit right now, no, I would not have him as part of 4. I would not have him as a room of part of 5.
Is there anything that could happen to get Harrison onto your roster? Or is it really just injury is the only scenario in which you would include him among your group of 53?
Yeah, pretty much. Yep.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. We shall see. Certainly somebody in jeopardy, somebody that is far from a lock to make this team. We want to see who's working in their base 3-4. Is it going to be Peyton Wilson? Will it be Cole Holcomb? What does Carson Bruner's second season look like? Clearly could be a path for Harrison to get knocked off the roster. Pittsburgh to save a couple of dollars there, but I'm a little less aggressive about it than I think you are.
All right.
All right, outside linebacker keeping 4 and TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, and Jack Sawyer. So pretty chalk with the edge guys.
Yeah, this feels pretty. I mean, it doesn't feel like I have to offer up an explanation here. If these 4 stay healthy, they should be on the 53-man roster. I guess the question becomes, is there a player that could potentially be the 5th that could offer you some special teams value? Where does Windman end up playing throughout the preseason? Is he going to be more inside linebacker? I mean, obviously he came out of the UFL as the edge rusher just most recently. He's good on special teams as well too. But this barring injury, this feels pretty cut and dry. I would be quite surprised if they ended up with 5 in total.
I know I mentioned this, I think, on the Friday show. We were kind of giving the thought exercise, but 8 linebackers total. That just feels pretty light for a 3-4 defense, Dave.
Sure, but I do have, usually if you're going to keep a 9th one, that guy's generally more special teams more than anything, as we've seen in the past. The Jeremiah Moons, roll back over the years there. Keep in mind that I am keeping Travis Homer, who is a running back that helps on special teams. I think, look, you got, a few other, I think options of some special teams guys.
Yeah, the
guys
safeties
like
we'll talk about.
Safeties and all like that. So, could you make the argument that this will be 9 in total and be a guy like Windman or Jamin Davis or somebody else that can help on special teams? Yeah, but I think it is important to keep in mind that if the 8 that I have are healthy entering the season, and the fact that Holcomb can play special teams, Bruner can play special teams, Jack Sawyer can play special teams, do you really need that 9th to? There's a good chance that 9th ends up being an active player anyway.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah, you have some special teamers elsewhere, which we'll talk about as we continue to snake through the defense. Let's go to cornerback next and keeping 5. Joey Porter Jr., Jamel Dean, Asante Samuel Jr., Brandon Eccles, and Dalen Everett.
Yeah, if I'm only going to keep 5, it's hard to run Brandon Eccles off the roster. I do kind of somewhat kind of wonder about how potentially safe he might be. But I mean, I think this 5 speaks for itself. I think the question really becomes is will the Steelers end up keeping a 6? Maybe someone like a Jameson because of ability to play on special teams, most notably as maybe a gunner and a vice guy, something along those lines there. Can Devin Boykin make any noise during training camp? What about Dante Kent? Can he end up giving you anything? Once you get past, though, I think these top 5, I think it opens up a lot of questions, especially when we went through the 90 and 30 series of, this corner, could potentially maybe fight for a roster spot, but more than likely would be a practice squad guy. It's just really hard, I think, if you're building this room up and knowing and thinking the way the roster construction will go on the outside of this group, particularly, it's hard to make a case for a 6 cornerback that you could definitely write in pen overall. And then look, you got Jalen Ramsey, who obviously can play throughout the secondary, outside corner, inside corner, obviously free safety, so you have some flexibility when it comes to him as well too. If you wanted to kind of call him, a defensive back, a corner slash safety, if you will. So I think that versatility opens up a little bit of flexibility to carry 5 in
That's
total.
true.
Overall, and then once again, it's hard to sit here right now and say which one. Who would you throw in that room as a 6 cornerback right now?
I had Deshaun Jameson as number 6 on my roster
Sure.
prediction, and so inactive, probably inactive to begin the year if you really mapped out all the inactives. If the group was healthy overall, the team was healthy, but that'd be probably next on my list.
And remember, if you only carry a 53-man roster and you don't make any elevations for week 1 from the practice squad, you're going to need at least 5 inactives. And you would think one of those would be a quarterback as the emergency quarterback, and then 4 other players from that point forward. Now, if however many players you wind up, if you do elevate from the practice squad for week 1, you would have to counterbalance that with an inactive on top of it. So your inactive list in week 1 is either going to be 5, 6, or 7 players long, depending on any elevations, and obviously we'll see how injuries plays into that and kind of makes guys automatic inactives.
To round things out at safety, you're keeping 5 and Jalen Ramsey. Calling him a safety, we expect him to play both safety and cornerback. Jaquan Brisker, Deshaun Elliott, Sebastian Castro, and Robert Spears Jennings. So keeping both of the young safeties on the 53, Dave.
Yeah, the top 3 speak for themselves in Ramsey, Brisker, and Elliott. Beyond that, look, I mean, you had a great article a couple of weeks ago about potential guys who could be the up back on the punt team. Castro ought to be in competition for that. He's a good special teams player outside of just that, so you could use him potentially as a 4-phase guy there. And then keeping Robert Spears Jennings, once again, this is just me giving a nod to him being a draft pick. I think he's got, we'll obviously see, can he lock up a gunner spot? He's going to have to show some special teams prowess throughout training camp and the preseason, I think, to make the 53-man roster. You obviously don't expect him to play much, if any, on defense throughout the regular season, barring injuries there. But just because I made it a goal to keep all the draft picks on my initial 53-man roster until given reason not to, that's why he's on here, and I'm interested to see if he can maybe win a gunner spot, and specifically I'll be watching him throughout training camp or throughout preseason special teams, and he ought to get a lot of burn on defense throughout the preseason as well too.
Yeah, I was going to remark you have all 10 draft picks making it, correct?
Yes.
And that was an intentional thought and choice you had as you were putting your roster together?
Yeah, just yeah, it was.
Okay. I mean, and like you said, based on the history, since Omar Khan has been drafting in the GM chair, no draft pick has been off the 53 for non-injury reasons. I should say no draft pick has been cut out of camp. They've either been on IR or they've made the team. So 10, though, is a much larger class than what he's had in the past. That'll make it more challenging for a veteran roster in many ways. But I think there's no... All 10 have a plausible path to make it. There's no crazy thought of, I can't believe this rookie draft pick is going to make the 53.
Sure, and if you were to talk about the guys most likely not to make it, it would obviously be Rubio, Robert Spears Jennings, and Eli Heidenreich, right?
If I told you one of those guys won't make it, who has the greatest chance to miss of those three that you just named?
Probably Rubio.
Yeah, I would probably agree there. All right, specialist pretty chalk. Chris Boswell as your kicker, Cameron Johnston, your punter, and Christian Kuntz, your long snapper, Dave.
Yeah, not a huge surprise there though. Cameron Johnson's going to be fun to watch throughout the preseason training camp and the preseason. Is he competing against maybe I don't know 5 other punters, backup punters around the NFL? Will they ultimately bring in somebody here at the start of camp? But I mean, yeah, he's the only punter under contract right now, so you have to roll with him by default. But I think he's the biggest question mark, obviously, of the three. Boswell, if he stays healthy, he's going to be your kicker. There's no reason to think Christian Kuntz won't be your long snapper, barring an injury or just looking really, really miserable throughout the rest of the offseason.
And barring a last-second roster move, Pittsburgh will carry just one punter on the roster and Cameron Johnston. So that appears to be the path Pittsburgh is taking.
Right.
And then you have your non-53-man spots, Daquan Hardy on IR. He got hurt in the spring. And then Broderick Jones you have on reserve PUP, which would knock him out for at least the first 4 games of the season.
Right. And look, I mean, obviously by 24 hours from now, that could be moot for the fact that if Broderick Jones does not start off training camp on active PUP, he would obviously not be a candidate to go to reserve PUP. So we'll find out fairly soon how the way my thoughts are on Broderick Jones at the start of camp.
And you want to mention anyone on the practice squad? You don't have to go through all 17, but you have Robert Tunyon is on there. Anybody else you want to give a shout to?
I mean, it's easy to put Julius Welshoff on there as the international player exception. You and I had a conversation about a couple of backup wide receivers in A.T. Perry and who was the other one there? Brandon
Perlman?
Smith. Max Hurlman. I suppose I should have had him as a wide receiver with Hurlman, but you get my point on.
Mm-hmm.
I think Hurlman is just a good practice player along the lines of the skill set of Eli Heidenreich, running back / wide receiver. A couple of veterans on here, and Tunyon and Darnell Savage and Anthony Goodlow. Keep an eye on Anthony Goodlow as we roll through this thing. Could he potentially be a guy maybe beats out a guy like Otomewo or Rubio for potentially one of those 7th spots there? I do have Greg Crippen making the practice squad as the center on the practice squad, beating out
McCollum?
McCollum for that spot there. So, and then I do have, I guess you could call Windman kind of a little bit of a seasoned guy at this point, and then Logan Lee, obviously a former draft pick, I have sticking around on the practice squad. So a lot of obviously all these guys are under contract right now. The fact of the matter is when we get to the time when the first 17-man practice squad is established, is it going to be all 17 of these guys? Absolutely not. Might be a few of those guys that aren't even under contract with this team right now, but I usually like to make my initial one include guys that are under contract right now, and this is my best stab at a 17 with guys that are currently under contract.
I like the overall look of your roster prediction, Dave. I think it looks pretty solid. Obviously, a lot can and will change, health included, going forward, but I think it's a really good foundation starting point. Let me ask you this last question. Who is number 53 on your roster, the last guy to make the team, quote unquote, and who is number 54, the first guy left off?
All right. I would imagine number 54 would be Tunyon.
Okay.
That would be the first guy on, I think.
And
there.
then 53, the last guy to actually get a lifeboat.
Let's do 52 and 53, and
Okay.
maybe not any particular order here. Rubio and the two of the draft picks, Robert Spears Jennings and Rubio, I think would be the guys that just creeped in.
Okay. So Jack Driscoll was when I was looking at, he was not quite on that cutoff line.
Well, I've got his designation kind of dependent on Broderick Jones.
You think even if But what about the case about making of keeping 8? Because like you said, you were the one who made that case originally of
Sure.
McCarthy's history has shown they could keep 8. You don't have to keep Driscoll just because Jones is on
Right,
reserve
but
PUP.
you asked me which one,
Mhm.
because of the way I think these groups go, and because I think Broderick Jones will be on PUP. I still think they keep 9, and that gives Driscoll, to me, Driscoll would be, I guess, technically 50, number 50.
Okay. Okay, fair. And if you just had to guess, if I made you guess 5 inactives, assuming no elevations for week 1 at Atlanta, I know Drew Allar is gonna be 1. Who'd be the other 4?
All right, I would have Drew Allar as the emergency third, and if I'm only had need 5 inactives, I think Eli Heidenreich would be inactive, so that's 2. Jack Driscoll as the ninth offensive lineman, that would be 3. Gabriel Rubio, number 4, on the list, and number 5.
One of the
Probably,
safeties?
yeah, probably Robert Spears Jennings.
Okay, that seems very reasonable 5 to me. So I like it, Dave. Good job.
All right, we differentiated, just on a handful, not many here, and I think people should rest easy tonight, knowing that my 53 is probably not going to be the 53.
Yeah, it's going to change. It'll all expectations and all thoughts will shift to some degree. Hopefully not in major ways, because that means obviously injuries probably are starting to hit this team. But yeah, there's going to be some change. It's always fun to look back come August 28th, right before cutdown, to see what it looks like in our predictions at the end compared to the beginning where we start right now. All right, Dave, any other final thoughts? I think that's basically going to wrap things up. I mean, go through an off-season review, but we've kind of already talked about the off-season so much. I think people know what's happening there. So any final thoughts?
No, I guess we can get to a couple of emails real quick here. Bryce writes in, "Hey guys, can't believe that the new football season is upon us. As always, your off-season coverage has been outstanding. Here's my one question: going into camp, who, in your opinion, is that best free safety on this roster, and why do you think that?"
I'm sorry, I got distracted for a second. It's best can you repeat just the question?
Going into camp, who, in your opinion, is that best free safety on this roster, and why do you think that?
Yeah, it's been a little bit tough. We've had that conversation. Is there a true free safety, especially once you get past Ramsey? I think Ramsey is the best free safety on the roster. How much we'll be doing that, especially in sub packages, we'll have to talk about. So that is kind of maybe a blind spot on this roster. I mean, who's next best? I mean, it's Brisker or Elliott. I would
I would think
say
it's Brisker.
I think Elliott's pass coverage has been better than he's been typecast as this box safety, this hitter, which he certainly is. I think he's made some plays in coverage. I think both certainly are better closer to the line of scrimmage. So I don't know if I have a great feeling. I want to obviously watch Brisker in the scheme in a Steelers uniform. I might go Brisker if you made me choose, but Ramsey be the obvious choice. Then.
Right. I think Ramsey would be the obvious choice, and specifically if you're going to go maybe a one high type situation, right?
Exactly.
All right, Richard Jameson. How did the Steelers make roommates assignments at St. Vincent? Is it random, or is there a pattern such as veteran with rookie or 2 cornerbacks, etc.? Richard, got to remember, we got a new head coach now. I don't even really think we totally knew Mike Tomlin's rhyme or reason to the roommate assignments there in camp. So I'm going to have to punt on this and say I have no idea the pattern or rhyme or reason, and specifically with Mike McCarthy being new as the head coach here.
Right, McCarthy, his team, his new rules. I know Tomlin had certainly some discretion before and could sort of pair guys up. I don't know if he was spending 2 hours getting the whole
Right.
roommate list together. I assume somebody else was doing that, and Tomlin will kind of give input. I want to tweak this and put this guy with this guy. A lot of times you do get veteran with the rookie or just guys that'll be working closely together. Rodgers and DK Metcalf last year were roommates, for example. So I'm not quite sure. I'm sure the head coach certainly has some discretion, but it probably gets created by a lower level staffer and kind of tweaked from there.
Yeah, I have no ideas. All I know is that as the pictures come out, we'll start getting an idea of a few of these guys who's rooming with who along the lines there. So I wish I could be more help there, but I have no idea. Jeff Berg says, "Is there a limit to international roster exemption? These international players." In other words, he asks, "Can Julius Wells is there a limit to how many seasons Julius Welshaw can qualify for an international exemption? Is it 3 years with those guys, the max, or I don't know if I have a guaranteed right answer to this. I've always been under the impression that usually if these guys don't work out in 3 seasons, you usually don't hear from them again.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm not aware of how many times and how many seasons one player can wear the exemption. I'm not aware of a limit. There certainly may be tucked away in the CBA somewhere. As you said, usually if a guy doesn't show something by year 3, then usually they just move on. So I could not tell you for an individual. For a team, you only get one international exemption. You can't have more than one. This happened to, I think, the Chiefs last year, where they had 2 international guys. They had to put the exemption on one of them. So it's one per team. For how many years can a guy wear it? It's at least 3, because Wilshoff is going into year 3, but I don't know if there was a cutoff.
All right, one last one from Matt Palmer. Good morning, gentlemen. Looking forward to Alex's tremendous training camp coverage. As always, super appreciative of your work.
Thank you.
The recent ESPN list where the Steelers got snubbed with 0 blue chip young players got me thinking, what is the gap between our young ascending players and ones from other teams rated more highly? He says, if I paired a Steelers player up with another young player who made the Pro Bowl, I'm wondering, in your estimation, how big is the gap between the two? Number 2, and could he get there or close the gap? Oh boy, I don't know if I don't know if we're set up with enough time to go through all this. He says Peyton Wilson and Jack Campbell. He wants to know the kind of the gap between those 2 players, Nick Herbig and Tua Puloto, Zach Frazier and Tyler Linderbaum, JPJ, and any of these young Pro Bowl corners like Surtain, Stingley, Mitchell, Horn, etc., Troy Falatano, and Tyler Smith. I could not find a fair comparison for Derek Harmon. Maybe Zach Allen, he says, but he's older. Jalen Carter, probably not fair to compare. Uh, I, I, he wants to know kind of, and I don't, this would take a long conversation. I don't know how far down I get what he's getting at overall. How far is the gap between several of these players? But I mean, I got to admit, I did not watch every snap of Jack Campbell last year. Did not watch every snap of two. Look, Herbig obviously has become a very accomplished pass rusher. Zach Frazier's not too far behind Tyler Linderbaum, I don't think. And look, I think JPJ is obviously behind some of these corners here from just production and takeaway numbers. I thought Falatano and Tyler Smith, although I didn't watch every snap of Tyler Smith, I thought Falatano really came along as specifically at right tackle there. Any thoughts on any of this? Is it just too deep, too nuanced?
It's a fun question. It's just hard to quantify how far away somebody is from somebody else. I mean, there is a gap there with all those examples, but it's hard to really measure that and how I want to try to measure that. And I wouldn't even know where to begin to answer that question effectively. So it's a fun question. I don't have a good starting point to really frame it well for you.
I think the big thing here is the guys, at least the Steelers that he mentioned in here. It's imperative that they get very good seasons out of them. Peyton Wilson, Nick Herbig, obviously coming off that big extension. Zach Frazier is in sights to have a nice extension after this coming season. You expect him to take another step along in his development, maybe even get an All-Pro vote or 2. And Joey Porter Jr., I mean, if you probably going to come out of this offseason here with him being at a minimum a top 5 highest paid corner in the league, and you expect further development with him. Falatano potentially moving over to the left side. Expect him to play like a first rounder, and then Derek Harmon, a very important second NFL season for Derek Harmon as well too. So I'm not going to get into the gaps in between all those players compared to these other young players around the NFL. But I think the big takeaway here is they need good seasons from all the Steelers listed by Matt in his email here.
To try to give some sort of answer to this, which player is most important to play to that comparison level? Like which Steeler, if you had to pick one that played to that comparison of Peyton Wilson to Jack Campbell would be the most beneficial for Pittsburgh in 2026?
Look, Peyton, when we talked about Peyton Wilson during the 90 and 30, I mean, he could very easily register 125, 130 tackles, but what does it look like in between all of that?
Mhm.
Are the tackles closer to the line of scrimmage? Is there more quote unquote playmaking, if you will? Is he, is he getting off blocks? For a guy that's going to play, at least 700, 800 snaps, you would figure at a minimum there. I think we've seen enough of guys like Frazier and Nick Herbig and JPJ and Falatano where we feel really, really comfortable about the arc that they're on and where would they expect them to go. I think with Peyton Wilson would be kind of, and even Derek Harmon to some degree once he got healthy and all. I would probably say Peyton Wilson is really the one that a big microscope or the biggest microscope will be on.
Yeah, I think it's a big microscope on Wilson in terms of who they would need to get that high level play. No bad options there, obviously. I would say Derek Carmen, though, and the comparison to, I know what the reader mentioned, Zach Allen. I might say
Mhm.
Derek Brown from the Panthers because if Harmon's out there and a great second year really takes that leap, feel better about the long term of it all, replacing Cam Hayward. As he enters his final NFL seasons, and then the domino effect. If Harmon's playing really well, that probably means that Wilson's job is easier. Patrick Queen's job is easier. The D line is making the linebackers' job a whole lot easier for those guys to go out there and perform. So there's a real kind of force multiplier if Derek Harmon really becomes a stud first round pick.
All right. Good angle there. All right. We got through about 4 email questions there, so we appreciate all that. Going to be a busy several days upcoming here, specifically at the start of training camp. Once again, Alex and I think, are going to record a episode late Tuesday evening, recap reporting day and news and nuggets and transactions and PUP and NFI and everything related to that. And that'll go up probably midnight on Wednesday and serve as our Wednesday podcast. And then obviously after every practice moving forward into the week, we'll have the evening special edition of the podcast. We're going to have to play Friday, Friday by ear, see how that goes. Maybe Alex and I will record a third. We just don't know. We're just, because of the new kind of schedule here, it's hard to kind of put in stamp how at least the regular editions of the Terrible Podcast will move on throughout training camp here. So hopefully you just be patient with us, and obviously just keep checking the site and your podcast feed and the YouTube feeds and all like that to stay on top of when something is getting published there. So, all right. And we will be back, as I mentioned, with a late Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning episode, and we'll see where things go from there. As always, you can follow me on Twitter/X at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do, and you want to donate, SteelersDepot.com, hit the donate button. Also, if you'd like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com, hit the ad-free button and follow the directions that way. So, until the Wednesday morning show, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.